They called her a fraud in front of everyone, a decorated veteran reduced to a wheelchair-bound liar in the eyes of the court. The judge made his contempt clear as he dismissed her claims of military service. The spectators whispered, the prosecutor smirked, and for a moment it seemed justice would fail her. Then she asked to speak. What happened next left the courtroom in stunned silence. The evidence she revealed didn't just prove her innocence, it exposed corruption that reached the highest levels of the court itself. The same judge who mocked her would leave the building in handcuffs. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more powerful true stories of justice served when the odds seemed impossible. The mahogany doors of Courtroom 17 swung open as Severin Thorne navigated her wheelchair through with practiced precision. At 45, her face carried the weathered determination of someone who had faced worse tribunals than this federal district court. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back severely, highlighting cheekbones sharpened by years of discipline and, more recently, pain. Judge Wesley Drummond barely glanced up from his bench. Case number 2025 CV 7842, United States v. Thorne, allegations of fraudulent military service claims and benefits fraud. His Harvard-educated drawl carried thinly veiled contempt. Let us not waste the court's time today. Severin's court-appointed attorney, Iris Callahan, clutched her disorganized files. Fresh out of the public defender's office, she was clearly overwhelmed by her first federal case. Your Honor, Prosecutor Olympia Graves rose with practiced confidence. The government will demonstrate that the defendant has perpetrated an elaborate fraud against the Veterans Administration and, by extension, the American people. Ms. Thorne claims to have served in classified intelligence operations from 2008 to 2016, culminating in injuries that allegedly left her paralyzed. However, we have found significant gaps in her service record that cannot be explained. The judge nodded approvingly. Proceed. Graves displayed military personnel records on the courtroom screens. As you can see, while Ms. Thorne did enlist in 2005, her service record shows administrative discharge in 2007. There is no record of the covert deployments she claims, no Purple Heart, no combat injuries documented by military physicians. From her wheelchair, Severin remained eerily calm, only the slight tapping of her finger against her armrest betraying any reaction. Furthermore, Graves continued, the disability benefits she's collected, nearly $1.2 million over 9 years, were obtained through falsified documentation and exploitation of overworked VA systems. Judge Drummond peered over his glasses at Severin. Another valor thief clogging our system when real veterans wait for care. Whispers rippled through the gallery. A journalist scribbled notes. 2 elderly veterans in the back row shook their heads in disgust. Iris stood awkwardly. Your Honor, my client maintains that her records are classified under— Ah, yes, Drummond interrupted. The convenient, it's classified defense. Ms. Callahan, this court has proper security clearance and has received no verification from any intelligence agency regarding your client's alleged service. Severin's eyes drifted to the court reporter, Bellamy Kingston, whose fingers moved across his stenotype machine with unusual intensity, his gaze occasionally meeting hers with something unspoken. As morning stretched into afternoon, Prosecutor Graves presented a parade of evidence. Inconsistent addresses during Severin's claimed deployment periods, medical evaluations that questioned the origin of her spinal injuries, testimony from VA administrators about irregularities in her paperwork. If I may direct the court's attention to Exhibit C, Graves said, highlighting a document on the screens. These are Ms. Thorne's residential lease agreements from 2010 to 2012, a period during which she claims to have been deployed to classified locations. Yet here we see her signing apartment renewals in person in Arlington, Virginia. Iris rose to object. Your Honor, my client has explained that operational security required maintaining domestic covers, including housing. How convenient, Judge Drummond remarked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Objection overruled. The courtroom felt increasingly hostile. Even Iris seemed to be creating distance from her client. A medical expert testified next, questioning whether Severin's paralysis resulted from combat injuries at all. The scar tissue patterns are inconsistent with the type of trauma described in the defendant's benefit claims, the physician stated clinically. Through it all, Severin maintained her composure, though her knuckles whitened against the armrests of her wheelchair. By mid-afternoon, the prosecution had constructed a damning narrative. Severin Thorne was not merely mistaken or exaggerating. She was a calculating fraud who had manufactured an elaborate military career to secure benefits she hadn't earned. Judge Drummond called a recess, but not before leaning forward. "Ms. Thorne, I suggest you consider a plea agreement before we resume. The evidence against you is substantial, and this court has little patience for those who steal honor from the truly deserving." As the gallery emptied, Severin's finger continued its rhythmic tapping, not nervousness, but a pattern. Morse code, tapping out, P-A-T-I-E-N-C-E. Iris slumped into her chair as the courtroom cleared. "Ms. Thorne, the judge is right. We should consider the prosecution's offer. 3 years instead of 15, restitution payments that would be negotiable." Severin's gray eyes fixed on her attorney. "You don't believe me either." Iris hesitated before answering. "What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is what we can prove, and right now, we have nothing to counter their evidence." "We will," Severin said simply. "By this afternoon." Iris looked baffled. "What are you talking about? We've submitted everything we have, which is practically nothing." Severin checked her watch. "Trust me, counselor. Just one more session." When proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had hardened further. Severin noticed a new presence in the back row, a man in a meticulously pressed civilian suit whose posture screamed military. He nodded almost imperceptibly toward her. Prosecutor Graves called her final witness. "The government calls Colonel Elliot Fairchild." A silver-haired officer in full dress uniform approached the stand. After establishing his credentials as Director of Personnel Records for Army Intelligence Operations, Graves asked directly, "Colonel, have you conducted a thorough search for records pertaining to Severin Thorne's claimed service between 2008 and 2016? "I have," Fairchild stated flatly. "There is no record of Ms. Thorne serving in any classified operation under Army Intelligence Command during those years." "And could these records have been misplaced or classified beyond your access?" Graves asked. "No, ma'am. I have Yankee White clearance specifically to verify such claims. If Ms. Thorne had served as she describes, I would find evidence of it." "So, in your professional opinion, what would explain Ms. Thorne's claims?" Colonel Fairchild's expression remained neutral. "In my experience, we occasionally encounter individuals who develop elaborate fictional narratives about military service. Some believe their own fabrications. Others are more deliberate in their deception." "And which category would you place the defendant in?" Before Fairchild could answer, Iris objected. "Calls for speculation, Your Honor." "Sustained," Judge Drummond said reluctantly, "though the evidence speaks for itself." When Iris rose for cross-examination, her questions were tepid and ineffective. Judge Drummond barely concealed his impatience, checking his watch repeatedly. "Colonel Fairchild," Iris began, "is it possible that records from highly classified operations might be compartmentalized in ways that even someone with your clearance might not have access?" "Theoretically possible, but extremely unlikely," Fairchild replied. "There are proper channels for verifying service even in the most sensitive operations, specifically to prevent situations like this one, where veterans need to prove their service for benefits." "Your Honor," Iris finally said, "we request permission to present evidence of Ms. Thorne's service." "Unless you have official documentation that somehow escaped Colonel Fairchild's attention, I'm inclined to rule it inadmissible," Drummond replied. Severin leaned forward and whispered something to Iris, who looked startled but nodded. "Your Honor," Iris said with newfound conviction, "my client requests permission to address the court directly under Procedural Rule 32I-4A. The judge's eyebrows arched. "The defendant wishes to speak? Very well. Perhaps hearing Ms. Thorne attempt to explain herself will expedite our proceedings." Severin wheeled herself forward. As she positioned herself before the bench, her file folder slipped, scattering papers. The bailiff moved to help, freezing momentarily as he noticed unusual government markings on several documents. "Thank you," Severin said quietly, her voice surprisingly steady and commanding despite its softness. The courtroom leaned forward collectively to hear her. "Your Honor, before I begin, I would like to clarify something about my military service that seems to have been misunderstood throughout these proceedings." Judge Drummond sighed audibly. "Ms. Thorne, This court has heard enough about your alleged— I was never officially part of Army intelligence, Severin interrupted, causing murmurs in the courtroom. That's why Colonel Fairchild found no records. My operational designation fell under Joint Special Operations Command Omega Division, reporting directly to the National Security Council. The colonel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes now fixed on Severin with new intensity. A convenient revision to your story, Judge Drummond remarked dryly. I suppose that explains why no records exist anywhere. On the contrary, Severin replied, her voice gaining strength. Records exist. They've simply been deliberately suppressed, not for national security reasons, but for financial ones. The man in the military pressed suit at the back of the courtroom made a subtle gesture toward the doors, where two more individuals had quietly entered. Your Honor, Severin continued, I've spent the last 3 years collecting evidence not just of my service, but of why my records were sealed and my benefits denied. With the court's permission, I believe it's time to present that evidence. Judge Drummond leaned forward, irritation plain on his face. Ms. Thorne, this court has indulged your story long enough, without corroboration from proper authorities. Your Honor, the bailiff interrupted, highly unusual in formal proceedings. There are federal agents requesting entry to the courtroom with documentation relevant to this case. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Judge Drummond's face. What agents? From where? Inspector General's office, sir, the bailiff replied. They're saying it's urgent. The courtroom fell silent as Drummond considered his options. The well-dressed man from the back row stood slightly, catching the judge's eye. Something in that gaze seemed to unsettle Drummond further. Very well, the judge said finally. Let them in, but this better not be a waste of the court's time. As the doors opened, Severin Thorne's expression remained unchanged, but her fingers ceased their tapping. The time for patience had ended. The moment for truth had arrived. 2 federal agents entered the courtroom, their movements precise and economical. They approached the bench and presented credentials to Judge Drummond, speaking too quietly for the gallery to hear. The judge's complexion shifted from ruddy confidence to something approaching ash. It appears, Drummond announced, clearing his throat, that we have some additional considerations in this case. He glanced toward Severin with newfound wariness. The court will allow the defendant to present her evidence. Severin nodded to Iris, who wheeled forward a small attaché case that had been beside her table all morning. Your Honor, before I begin, Severin said, her voice now carrying throughout the silent courtroom, I request permission to submit new evidence under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. Chapter 3500. Judge Drummond frowned. The Jenks Act applies to witness statements, Ms. Thorne. There are no applicable witness statements to compel here. I believe you'll find this authorization allows the exception, Severin replied, producing a sealed envelope bearing the presidential seal. This was delivered this morning by special courier. The bailiff brought the envelope to Judge Drummond, whose face visibly paled as he examined its contents. For the first time, uncertainty dominated his features. Proceed, he said tersely. Severin nodded to Iris, who opened the attaché case. 8 years ago, Severin began, her voice now carrying a quiet authority, I served as intelligence operative Phantom 6 in Operation Adamantine Shield. My team was responsible for identifying and neutralizing financial networks supporting terrorist cells across northern Africa. She removed a small digital device from the case. This contains audio recordings from field operations, including the extraction mission where I sustained my injuries. A court technician connected the device to the courtroom audio system. After a moment of static, the speakers crackled with tense voices amidst background chaos. Phantom 6, position compromised. Exfil at secondary location. Taking heavy fire from Southeast Ridge. Another voice, unmistakably Severin's. Copy that. Moving to secondary extraction point with package. Require immediate dust-off. Explosive sounds overwhelmed the audio, followed by screams and urgent medical terminology. Colonel Fairchild shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expression now grave. Next, Severin produced a flash drive. These are mission reports bearing my operational signature and biometric verification. The courtroom screens displayed heavily redacted documents, but with Severin's code name clearly visible alongside operation dates matching her claimed service period. Judge Drummond's knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench. Ms. Thorne, regardless of any classified service, which remains unverified by proper channels, The matter before this court concerns benefits fraud. I'm coming to that, Your Honor. Severin's calm was unnerving as she pulled another document from the case. This is my original medical evaluation from Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, dated December 10, 2016, confirming spinal trauma consistent with the helicopter crash documented in the mission reports. She placed the document on the evidence table, where the bailiff collected it and brought it to the judge. And this, she continued, producing a thumb drive, contains satellite imagery of the extraction mission near Kasserine Pass on December 8, 2016, where our team came under fire. The screens displayed grainy but unmistakable aerial footage of a nighttime firefight, followed by a helicopter approach and what appeared to be a missile strike on the aircraft. The courtroom remained deathly silent. On December 8, 2016, Severin continued, my team was extracted under heavy fire. The helicopter that retrieved us was operated not by military personnel, but by contractors from Helix Defense Contractors. She pulled out more documents. Contractors who failed to follow proper protocols, resulting in a friendly fire incident that severed my spine. One of the federal agents who had entered earlier stepped forward. Your Honor, these documents have been authenticated by our office. They match records in the Inspector General's classified archives. Judge Drummond's expression hardened. I fail to see how any of this relates to the charges of benefits fraud before this court. Even if we accept this evidence of service, the issue remains that Ms. Thorne filed for benefits without proper documentation. What makes this relevant to my case, Severin said, placing the final document on the evidence table, are these financial records showing $4.7 million transferred from Helix Defense subsidiaries to offshore accounts controlled by Westridge Consulting, a company for which you, Judge Drummond, served as legal counsel before your appointment to the bench and in which you remain a silent partner. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Judge Drummond's face flushed dark red. This is preposterous. I will have you held in contempt, he slammed his gavel. There's more, Severin continued inexorably. Authorization forms bearing your signature, requesting the sealing of all records related to Operation Adamantine Shield personnel following the Kasserine incident. Forms dated 3 days after you received the largest of these payments. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Severin produced documents showing Judge Drummond's signature on classification orders that effectively erased her service record and those of her entire team. The prosecution has built its case on the absence of records, Severin said, addressing the gallery now as much as the court. Records that were deliberately concealed not for national security, but to protect Helix Defense from liability for the friendly fire incident that paralyzed me and killed 3 members of my team. Judge Drummond reached for his phone. Security to courtroom 17 immediately. That won't be necessary, Your Honor. The well-dressed man from the back row stepped forward, opening his jacket to reveal federal credentials. Agent Bellamy Kingston, Inspector General's office. We've been recording these proceedings as part of a 2-year investigation into benefits fraud, though not the kind the prosecution has alleged. The doors opened as federal marshals entered, moving not toward Severin but toward the bench. Prosecutor Graves stood frozen, her case evaporating before her eyes. Your Honor, the government had no knowledge of these allegations. If there's been any impropriety— Save it, Counselor, one of the federal agents interrupted. Your office was notified of potential conflicts of interest in this case 3 times. The records show you personally dismissed those concerns. Judge Drummond found his voice again. This is judicial intimidation. I will not be threatened in my own courtroom. It's not your courtroom anymore, Westley, said a stern voice from the entrance. Chief Judge Amara Bashara stood in the doorway, her expression granite. You are relieved, effective immediately. Marshals, please escort Judge Drummond to the holding area while we sort this out. As the marshals approached the bench, Drummond's composure finally shattered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. This was a classified matter of national security. No, Severin corrected quietly. It was a matter of money. The classified designation was applied after the fact to cover liability, not to protect operations. That's why you fought so hard to label me a fraud, because acknowledging my service would expose Helix's negligence and your complicity. As the marshals led Drummond away, Colonel Fairchild stood from the witness box and approached Severin. His military bearing remained intact, but shame was evident in his eyes. Major Thorne, he said, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, I was ordered to testify as I did today. I was told this was a matter of national security. He removed the silver eagle insignia from his uniform and placed it on the table before her. The honor is yours, not mine. Chief Judge Bishara took the bench and addressed the stunned courtroom. These proceedings are temporarily suspended pending review. Ms. Graves, I expect your office to prepare dismissal papers immediately. Olympia Graves nodded numbly, gathering her materials with shaking hands. Agent Kingston approached Severin. Well done, Major Thorne. Your patience was instrumental. Not just mine, Severin replied. This isn't just about me. There are 36 other operators whose records were sealed in similar cases. Kingston nodded. We know. That's why we needed to let this play out in court, to establish the pattern. Your case breaks it open for everyone. The gallery began to clear, reporters rushing to file stories that would dominate headlines within the hour. The veterans who had earlier glared at Severin now watched her with newfound respect, several offering quiet nods of acknowledgement. The man in the military-pressed suit finally approached. As he drew closer, his identity became clear to those with military background. General Demon Lambrick, Director of Special Intelligence Operations. Major Thorne, he said quietly, we have much to discuss about the rehabilitation of your record and those of your team. Severin met his gaze steadily. And their benefits. Specialist Moreau's family is still fighting for survivor benefits. Lieutenant Adeyemi needs reconstructive surgery the VA keeps denying. Those come first, General. Understood. The General's response was clipped but sincere. I give you my word. As the courtroom cleared, Iris finally found her voice again. You knew. All along, you knew this would happen. Not exactly, Severin admitted. I knew the truth would come out eventually. Justice just needed the right pressure point. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, questions overlapping. Major Thorne, did you deliberately set up Judge Drummond? How long have you been collecting evidence? Will you be filing civil suits against Helix Defense? Severin ignored them all, navigating her wheelchair through the chaos with the same precision she had shown entering the courtroom that morning. Except now, her shoulders carried none of the burden they had before. Justice had been served, not with violence or vengeance, but with patience and meticulously gathered truth. For Severin Thorne and the 36 other operators whose records had been sealed to protect corporate interests, the fight was far from over. But for the first time in years, the battlefield was level. The courtroom erupted into controlled chaos. Judge Drummond was escorted from the bench by marshals, his face ashen as he was relieved of his gavel and robe. Prosecutor Graves stood frozen at her table, her carefully constructed case collapsing around her. The gallery buzzed with shocked conversations and hurried phone calls. Chief Judge Bishara's presence commanded immediate respect as she assumed the bench. This court will have order, she stated firmly, her voice cutting through the commotion. The room quickly settled into a tense silence. In light of the extraordinary circumstances and evidence presented, these proceedings are formally suspended, she announced. Ms. Graves, I expect dismissal papers on my desk within the hour. Yes, Your Honor, the prosecutor replied, her voice barely audible. Agent Kingston approached Severin, offering a respectful nod. Well done, Major Thorne. Your patience was instrumental. Not just mine, Severin replied. This isn't just about me. There are 36 other operators whose records were sealed in similar cases. Kingston nodded. We know. That's why we needed to let this play out in court, to establish the pattern. Your case breaks it open for everyone. Colonel Fairchild rose from the witness stand and crossed the courtroom with measured steps. Without a word, he unpinned the silver oak leaf from his uniform and placed it on the table before Severin, a gesture of profound respect and apology that silenced the room. I was ordered to testify as I did, he said quietly. The shame is mine to bear. You were following orders, Colonel, Severin replied, but now you have the chance to follow your conscience instead. Fairchild straightened. I intend to provide full testimony about how military records were altered in these cases. My career may be over, but I can at least help set things right. Olympia Graves recovered her composure enough to approach Severin's table. Major Thorne, she began, struggling to find appropriate words. The United States Attorney's Office had no knowledge of Judge Drummond's involvement. If we had known, Your office received 3 separate whistleblower reports, Agent Kingston interrupted. All dismissed without investigation. We'll be looking into that as well. Graves paled but nodded. As I said, we'll be filing for immediate dismissal with prejudice. And speaking personally, I owe you an apology. The well-dressed man in the military-pressed suit finally approached. As he drew closer, his identity became clear to those with military background. General Demon Lambrick, Director of Special Intelligence Operations. Major Thorne, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. On behalf of a grateful nation and a regretful chain of command, I extend our deepest apologies. Severin acknowledged him with a nod, but addressed the court instead. I never wanted recognition. I never sought medals or accolades. I only wanted the medical benefits promised to those who serve, benefits that have been systematically denied to dozens of operators whose missions remain classified. Agent Kingston took center stage. This case represents the culmination of a 2-year operation investigating corruption in veterans' disability cases. We've identified 37 cases where wounded intelligence personnel had their records altered or classified to avoid paying costly long-term benefits. Judge Drummond was merely one participant in a larger conspiracy. Iris Callahan, still processing her client's true identity, whispered, "You knew this would happen today. You planned it." "Justice requires the right moment," Severin replied softly. Chief Judge Bishara addressed Severin directly. "Major Thorne, while this court offers its sincere apologies for your treatment, I understand there are broader implications. What would you have us do for the others in your situation?" Severin wheeled forward slightly. "Your Honor, I would ask for 3 things. First, an immediate review of all cases involving classified service and denied benefits. Second, an independent commission to investigate how military records were manipulated. And third, immediate provisional benefits for veterans waiting for their cases to be resolved." The Chief Judge nodded. "Consider it done. This court will issue the necessary orders today." As the formal proceedings concluded, Severin navigated her wheelchair toward the exit. The courthouse steps outside presented yet another barrier, one she had navigated countless times before. As she approached, she found a line of veterans forming a human corridor, each rendering a solemn salute as she passed. The media representatives in attendance were already rushing for the exits, phones pressed to ears, breaking news alerts being prepared. Veterans who had earlier glared at Severin now stood in respectful silence. At the bottom of the steps, Iris caught up with her. "Why this way? Why not go public earlier? Why endure being called a fraud when you could have cleared your name years ago?" "Because some battles aren't won with weapons or headlines," Severin interrupted gently. "Some require patience and the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Going public would have meant they could control the narrative, dismiss me as disgruntled or unstable. I needed them confident enough to make mistakes in a forum they couldn't control." Iris shook her head in amazement. "The whole time I was defending you, you were 10 steps ahead of everyone." "Not everyone," Severin replied, glancing toward Agent Kingston, who was speaking with reporters nearby. "The Inspector General's office has been building this case for years. I was just the bait that finally brought everyone into the open." General Lambrick approached once more. "There will be commendations, Major, public recognition. What I want," Severin said firmly, "is for you to reopen the cases of my team members. Specialist Moreau's family is still fighting for survivor benefits. Lieutenant Adeyemi needs reconstructive surgery the VA keeps denying. That's the recognition that matters." The general nodded gravely. "You have my word. By this evening, I'll have signed the orders personally." "And Helix Defense Contractors?" "Their government contracts are being suspended pending investigation," Lambrick confirmed. "The Department of Justice is already preparing charges for contract fraud and negligence." Severin nodded, satisfied. "Then my work here is done." As she prepared to leave, an elderly veteran in a worn Vietnam-era jacket approached. He stood tall despite his years, executing a perfect salute. "Major, my name is Harold Weathers. They did the same thing to me in '72. Different war, same story. Thought I'd die before anyone believed me." Severin returned his salute. "Justice shouldn't take a lifetime, sir." "No, it shouldn't," he agreed. "But thanks to you, it finally came." He gestured to a group of aging veterans standing nearby. "We've formed an advocacy group for cases like yours. If you ever need civilian backup, you've got it." As the sun began to set, Severin wheeled away from the courthouse for the last time. The media clamored for statements she wouldn't give. The story would spread without her help, a story of corruption exposed and honor restored, not through violence or vengeance, but through meticulous documentation and unwavering patience. Later that evening, in her modest apartment, Severin opened a small wooden box containing just 2 items: a faded photograph of 6 soldiers standing before a helicopter, faces confident and untroubled by what lay ahead, and the silver intelligence branch insignia she had worn that day in court. She placed Colonel Fairchild's oak leaf beside them, closed the box, and turned out the light. The next morning, her phone rang early. It was Agent Kingston. "Thought you'd want to know. Judge Drummond is cooperating. He's naming names all the way up to the deputy secretary level." "Good," Severin replied. "And the others?" "Retroactive benefits are being processed for all 37 cases. Your team members are at the top of the list." After hanging up, Severin wheeled herself to the window. Outside, news vans were already gathering. The media frenzy was just beginning. Her story was becoming national news, with calls for congressional investigations and policy reforms. But that wasn't what brought the slight smile to her face. On her phone was a text message from Lieutenant Adeyemi. "Surgery approved. Thank you, Phantom 6. In the days that followed, more messages arrived, from team members, from other veterans who had faced similar battles, from military families finally receiving the benefits they'd been denied. Each one confirmed what she had known all along, that justice, like the most effective intelligence operations, wasn't about glory or recognition, but about changing the facts on the ground. A week after the courthouse showdown, Severin received an official letter. Inside was her fully reinstated service record, complete with decorations and commendations previously denied. Attached was a personal note from the Secretary of Defense. "Your most recent mission may have been your most important. The nation owes you a debt it can never fully repay." She placed the letter in the wooden box alongside the other mementos, not trophies of victory, but reminders of what happened when one person refused to surrender to a corrupt system. That evening, Severin attended a small private gathering at Harold Weathers' home. 24 veterans from conflicts spanning 6 decades sat together, sharing stories previously untold. Some, like her, bore physical wounds. Others carried invisible scars. All had faced a system that had tried to erase their service. "To the truth," Harold offered as a toast. "May it always find its way to the light. To those still fighting their battles," Severin added, "may they never fight alone." As conversations continued around her, Severin found herself approached by a young woman in an Air Force uniform. "Major Thorne, I'm Captain Eliza Reed. I work in records management at the Pentagon. After your case broke, I identified 63 more veterans with similar records discrepancies." Severin's eyes narrowed. "Have you reported this?" "Yes, ma'am. To Agent Kingston. We're working through them now." The captain hesitated. "I wanted to thank you personally. My father was one of the cases like yours. He died still trying to prove his service was real." "I'm sorry we couldn't help him in time," Severin said. "But you're helping others," Captain Reed replied. "That's what matters." As Severin left the gathering, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path to justice had been long and painful, requiring her to endure public humiliation and accusations of fraud. She had been forced to sit silently while her honor was questioned, her service mocked, her integrity attacked. But in that courtroom, when the moment was right, the truth had spoken with a power no lie could withstand. And now, because she had refused to surrender, others would not have to fight the same battle. Justice, like intelligence work, was often accomplished in silence. The truth had finally spoken for itself. From her apartment window the next morning, Severin watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of promise. Her phone chimed with another message. General Lambrick confirming that Specialist Moreau's family had received their full benefits, backdated to 2016. One mission completed. Many more to go. But for the first time in years, Severin Thorne felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope that the system could be fixed, that promises made to those who serve could be kept, that truth, however patient it needed to be, would eventually prevail.